Hey there, Deb. I hope the weather in New Jersey is great and not as cold as it is here. Good afternoon, Lynn. Hope you're having a great day as well. Okay. Let's start about 1 minute as people still are trickling in. Okay, there is always a replay for everybody else. So I just want to say good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another one of our Changemaker 20s. Again, as always, we love to engage you guys in conversation. And so just hit that chat button below. Make sure that when you guys are typing out any messages, it's to all panelists and attendees so everybody can get involved. And if you guys have any questions, definitely leave them down so that we can get and explore some of what your concerns are with Dr. Sherry Walling today, as we had an amazing week last week with her as we learned how to manage and navigate our relationships with our children and with our spouses. I thought it was great. And so to even just get us started, for any of you guys tuning in today, just leave down a yes or a me if you guys are working from home with kids. And for anyone who this is their first time, this platform is where we get to chat with our subject matter experts and an open forum for all of you to ask questions and get to speak with them directly. And if you weren't here last week, today we have Dr. Sherry Walling, who is one of the world's only clinical psychologists focused on the mental health of entrepreneurs and the self-employed. She has a unique mixture of elite research training, psychotherapy experience, and time in the entrepreneurial trenches. So in short, she helps smart people do hard things. And so continuing on from our last week's conversation, we did have a little bit of a conversation on how to protect ourselves, our families, and our colleagues from the psychological toll with our current challenges. So Dr. Sherry, perhaps you can maybe summarize a couple of the key messages that we went through, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about when it comes to mental health and protecting our own well-being as well as the well-being of those who we live with and who we interact with on a regular basis. And I'm so grateful that Talk Boutique is supporting conversations like this, because I think the conversation about mental health is just core to thinking about how we can move through this experience of pandemic well and effectively. And what's happening now is we're shifting from acute crisis, right? This sort of urgent need to reshape our lives and sort of everybody roll up your sleeves and figure out life right now. That's the acute crisis. It's a crisis response experience. But we're shifting from that into something that's more chronic, like this understanding that this is kind of life now for a while, right? There's still conversation about, when the businesses open up and things like that. But I think there's now just this general understanding that our world is quite different and will be different for some time to come. And the shift from acute crisis to chronic stress is an important one to consider when we think about mental health. Because we're kind of gearing up for a mental health marathon, right? The challenge of taking care of our own well-being, taking care of our kids, attending to our colleagues is no longer the, urgent, but it's the ongoing need to have really good practices in place. So some of the things that we want to be thinking about now are how to grieve well, how to acknowledge all of the losses that we are all experiencing, whether it's actual loss of life or whether it's the loss of the Little League season or the graduation ceremony or even just the vacation that we planned for this summer that may or may not happen. So grieving well becomes this really deep skill that all of us are going to need to learn, not only for the urgency of the crisis, but for probably the next year to come. And that's a time where we are really willing to acknowledge our own emotional state. We're willing to stay present to the sadness and loss that we feel. Those are some of the things that go into grieving well. And right alongside that, in almost the opposite end of the emotional spectrum, there's a need to, during this season, figure out how to play in very creative ways. And that might surprise you, right? On one hand, I say grief, and on the other hand, I say play, but that's what it is. It's crossing the full spectrum of the emotional experience and deciding to proactively pursue joy, even in the midst of so much loss. So if you are home with kiddos, that means doubling down on your play as a parent. That means Lego sets. It means making a garden. It means getting your hands in the dirt and figuring out how to find whatever ounce of joy you can sort of squeeze out of life right now, because we all need the counterbalance of joy in the face of so much uncertainty and loss. So grief and play, I think, are deep themes that all of us are maybe needing extra doses of right now. But more globally is the need for deep empathy. When we think about our kids, when we see maybe behavior in them that's frustrating or seems regressive or seems defiant, to empathetically understand that the language of kids is not the same language as adults. And so when they're digging their heels in and saying no, or they don't want to do that school assignment, or it just feels like a power struggle, that's the invitation for empathy, and to realize in that moment you're dealing with a kiddo who's also experiencing their own loss and is limited in their language and how to deal with that. So if we can increase our capacity for empathy with ourselves, with our kids, with our partners, with our coworkers, I think we will have what we need in place to hopefully make it through this extraordinary season of challenge without too much sort of long-term mental health damage.
Mm-hmm. And I actually had a conversation with someone not too long ago, a little bit in regards to the mental health damage that can arise from this. And their parents who just haven't had the capacity to homeschool during this time, but they're more concerned with the mental well-being of their kids. And so maybe what advice do you have with parents who are homeschooling maybe, and then just trying to find the balance to do both?
Yeah. So I work with a lot of really high performing people who are ambitious, and I love that about them, but it's a little bit dangerous right now when it comes to homeschooling. So I know that there are people that I work with who in the back of their minds are like, okay, finally I can teach my kid to code, or, we're going to memorize the Gettysburg Address, or my 14-year-old's going to learn calculus. And man, what I would just love to say to everyone is lower the expectations and remember that the mental health toll of pressure is super not necessary right now. Also, I think we can remember that lots of things are learning experiences that are not paper pencil tasks. So if you can pair play and education, if you can understand that cooking is a great way to learn fractions, it's a great way to learn chemistry, and it's also a way to connect emotionally with your kiddo. So I would say that as somebody who has a lot of homeschooling experience, you almost never need more than 3 hours of, hardcore sort of school time that a child who is focused can really accomplish in 2 to 3 hours what a school day can accomplish. So that leaves all this other time for play and all this other time for connection, which frankly is much more important right now than it's ever been before.
Mm-hmm. Now, what if you are the parents who aren't able to compromise? Perhaps you're a single parent and you have to be on call, you have to be available from 9 to 5, and you cannot compromise anytime whatsoever. What would you have to give to those individuals who may not be able to even have those 3 hours of focus time?
Yeah, I mean, I feel you. There's some deep empathy there. I think that it calls for an extraordinary burden on you, and it's not really fair. And so I think the thing that I would say, though, is it's an invitation to be creative, like maybe you never have been before. So maybe there's an hour of school from 8 to 9 where you can sit down with your child and just support them in their learning. And maybe you return to 2 hours of school after your work day is done. It makes a really long day for you, and it's not super sustainable forever. But if those are the facts that you're dealing with, then, it's okay to not have your kid mastering complicated things right now. It's okay for your kid to have more playtime, and your mental health and your ability to be patient and loving is more important than school. So if you need to kind of phone it in on school for a little while, that's okay.
Hmm. And do you find that there's a difference between helping manage toddlers versus having someone in their adolescence, a teenager?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think we're all aware that toddlers need a lot of like eyes on and hands on sort of observation and care. Obviously, toddlers' safety awareness is a little different than that of a teenager. But I will say that that doesn't mean that we can just kind of give the teenagers the tablets and check in with them in 8 hours. That some of the risks that teens are facing are different than the risks that toddlers are facing, but they still need our care and attention in ways that might be surprising to us. So, excuse me, just in terms of really helping to monitor how kids are using devices, and also really helping kids, teenagers especially, offset the like deep developmental disruption of not being able to have social time, right? Teenagers, their whole life is supposed to be about how to maintain friendships, how to understand oneself in relationship to other people. So they are really the most vulnerable to some of the mental health consequences of having to stay home and not being able to do the most important tasks of teenagehood, which are interacting with others.
Mhm. And with that being said, how do you then communicate effectively to teenagers, especially if they want their own time, and you can give them that, but at the same time you also want to make sure you can have that sustainable relationship with them?
Yeah, I think every kid is different. So it's hard to make these like really broad sweeping, advice. But I do think that you have to think about who your kid is and what motivates them. What's the logic of your child? So, I have a 13-year-old who is really, really very factual and interested in science. So I can break down the basic science of the virus and explain like, this is why we have to live like this for now. And he gets that. That's his language. Other teens might be pretty responsive to like the social pressure of everyone is doing this. This is the new social norm. That might be good logic for them. I think also communicating and asking your kiddo, hey, what do you feel like you need? Is this a day where you need some alone time? Is this a day when you need a couple hours that you can just hang out on Zoom with some friends? Is this a day that you need a project to do? What are you most needing? And helping kids even develop the capacity for self-reflection so that they can name what their needs are. Kids, especially teens, do need privacy, but privacy doesn't, it sort of is determined by someone's age and capacity. So for example, yesterday, my 9-year-old daughter had her school laptop in her room. And I was like, you know what? You don't get to have a laptop in your room when you're 9. Nope, 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 nope. You need to have that in a public space in our, within our home where I can look over your shoulder and see. And she's like, well, I need privacy. And I was like, darling, as a 9-year-old with a computer, there's no such thing as privacy for you in this house. Like, sorry. It's a little bit of a different conversation with a 15-year-old, but being just sensitive to what they need and having open conversation is, I think, the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned helping build the capacity of self-awareness. How did you work on that with your kids?
Yeah, I think naming emotional language, helping kids express themselves, depending on the age of your child, that can be through art, through drawing. It can be through a feelings chart. You can print them out from the internet. It often has a bunch of different faces that express different emotions, and you can have kids like, okay, what's your feeling today? They can point to it physically. They make them even for toddlers who are quite young and might not have the nuance of lots of language. So even just checking in with the high and the low point of the day. So we do this over our dinner hour, where we ask each person in our family to say what their high and low was. And that's a really powerful way to sort of gauge like, oh, you're really getting worn out by all this school pressure. So building in conversation that helps kids be invited into self-reflection.
Mm-hmm. And you did allude to this a little bit, but what if you have a child who's a little bit more in tune to their emotions, and they're taking this a lot more heavily than others. And so how do you help them cope, and how do you help them transition into this new lifestyle?
Yeah, I think again, open conversation and also lots of hugs and reassurance. We do have one kiddo in our family that is really, really anxious and is very worried about myself or my husband getting the virus and dying. Like big, big fear for a kiddo. Thankfully, he's able to articulate it, which is helpful, so we can talk it through. But I think helping kids connect the dots to why you're wearing masks, why you're staying home, why you're wearing gloves, that all of those behaviors are really designed as safety mechanisms that help us all decrease our level of anxiety, so that those changes in behavior aren't seen as something that triggers an increase in anxiety. So explaining as much as possible, but again, all of us, kids included, really benefit from as much physical comfort as we can give at this point. So lots and lots of hugs, lots of cuddles. We've, breaking out some like nice fuzzy blankets, like just helping to create the physical sensation of safety is really helpful to help counterbalance some of that emotional anxiety.
Yeah, and last week you were mentioning how you guys built this metaphorical but also physical shelter outside, and it really helps them kind of cope with just feeling that safety net, which I think is amazing. Now, what if you are a parent who lives in an apartment, but what are some kind of ways to help make your place bigger than it is, like to give them a scope of fantasy at home?
Yeah, one of the other things we also did in our home was to make a cupboard under the stairs, which is a reference to Harry Potter. So we took a closet and cleaned out everything on the floor, and then took out everything that was draping down. So there's enough of a crawl space in there. And then we put some Harry Potter books and decorated it. And so it's a new secret special room in our house that began when the quarantine. So any kid who needs like a quiet time and they wish not to be disrupted, they can go in the cupboard under the stairs. And that can be a way to make your house feel bigger. We use it as sensory rooms for kiddos who have some difficulty with big sensations. It's a quiet spot with soft blankets and stuffed animals where you can read or just go to be quiet.
It's super interesting. And to kind of help bring everything together, you spoke a lot about helping kids just communicate better, being able to be more in tune with their emotions, and to be able to grasp that little bit of self-awareness so that they can understand where it's coming from, and then they can articulate it. And I think that helps build that relationship between parent and child, so that you guys are able to then really hone in onto the real problems and discuss it together, so that they're involved with you and you're involved with them, so that it doesn't get too overwhelming. I think that's amazing. It's very practical as well. Perhaps maybe you can leave us off with maybe one more thing to take away before calling.
Yeah, I think all of that self-reflective capacity in your kiddo is really very, very much determined on your self-reflective capacity. So parents' mental health is the strongest predictor of kiddos' mental health. So if you are frazzled and frayed and just struggling, your kids are going to feel that, which is not, I don't say that to put pressure on you as much as to say that's really this deep invitation to take good care of yourself, because your ability to be calm and serene and loving is going to predict their ability to, get through this well. So care for yourself first. Extra sleep, extra books, extra whatever you need to be able to show up as present as possible for your kids.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sherry. I mean, that was 20 minutes already. It always flies by, and I always can't believe how fast it goes. And there's so many things I'm sure people want to ask, and as well as myself. And so thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you to everybody here today that tuned in. And unfortunately, this is all the time that we have. But if you do have any further questions, I'm hoping this isn't the last time Dr. Sherry is with us on this platform. But definitely, if you do want to book her for any custom virtual event or for her consulting, definitely shoot me a message. You can also find her on her podcast, which is Zen Founder, if I'm not mistaken. And it's on most podcast listening services, as well as her book, The Entrepreneur's Guide of Keeping Your Shit Together. I have it. I've read up until halfway, and I'm going to finish it now, like I've heard her speak again, it's given me the motivation to say, oh, I forgot I have that. And so definitely want to finish that. And I recommend you guys check it out as well. It's a great book. Um, we will be continuing our virtual speaker series with our virtual lunch and learn tomorrow with Dr. Mary Donahue. Dr. Mary's research tells us that if you can learn to classify people that you communicate with into groups and identify patterns of behavior, you can reduce your digital stress by 10% and enjoy 76 more really good days. And so that's going to be very interesting. I'm sure we can learn a lot from that, and everybody wants to look into having 76 more good days out of this year. And so with that being said, Sherry, I just want to say thank you once again, and to everybody who came in today, thank you for tuning in, and always take care. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected, and we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.